So let's first talk about live lobsters. So how do we store live lobsters?
So lobsters oftentimes will come packed in newspaper like this. It's been soaked in salt water. You do want to keep live lobster away from fresh water. It does kill it, as it does with any kind of live shellfish, mussels, crab, anything that you get in live. The fresh water will definitely hurt it.
So definitely no ice?
No ice.
Okay. Okay.
Unless it's pre-picked, packaged in a plastic container or something like that, then ice, but not live.
Okay, next we want to talk about the two different types of Maine lobsters you can get. You can get a hard shell and a soft shell lobster. Lobsters molt, so that means that the shell kind of goes through different stages. So what are the two different stages that we kind of...
Right, so lobsters, like a lot of animals, their insides grow, but their outer shell doesn't, so they have to molt it. So soft shells are kind of prized for their sweetness. It's 90% of the catch. You're going to find soft shells, they're more common. Typically they have a sweeter meat, as opposed to the hard shell that is really much harder to crack open, but there's more meat. They filled into the shell at that point.
So like the soft shell is basically like a brand new shell for the lobster.
Correct, yeah. They've just molted.
Yeah.
If you guys have ever had soft shell crab, it's kind of the same thing. Right, in the hard shell, they've grown in and they're getting ready to molt again.
Okay. So why would you want to have a hard shell compared to like a soft shell lobster?
More
Like,
meat. There's more meat.
Yeah, yeah. And then the life also, because these are so new in their shell, the soft shells, they don't last as long out of the water, while the hard shells have a little bit more to them, so that they last a little bit longer. So if you have a lobster that you're going to be traveling with, or maybe it'll be like a week or so before you actually cook it, you might want to go with more of a hard shell lobster. And there are actually times in the year where you can get like an in-between type of lobster. So
that's correct, and for shipping
right.
as well, soft shells don't ship well.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy. You can take a soft shell and pretty much put your finger through it.
Yeah. Which today we have nothing but soft shells.
They're all soft shells today.
Yeah, so we're gonna break those down too. So okay, great. So why don't we go ahead and prepare these two lobsters for steaming lobsters? Do you want to do? Okay, so now we're preparing to steam the lobsters. What you want to do first is
remove the bands.
Yeah.
I remove them before I cook them for one major reason. When they're hot, taking these bands off can be a real pain in the butt.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I don't like rubber in my cooking liquid.
Yeah, that's good, yeah. And I've heard that sometimes the lobster, while it's like steaming, it doesn't have the freedom to move its claws, so it sometimes makes it a little bit tough of the meat. But I'm to be honest, I haven't really noticed that difference. So what do you have? What kind of pot is going on here?
So this is kind of like a double boiler you guys would use. So this is an insert here. The difference being the insert is, can I pick it up without roasting my fingers? It's perforated, has holes in it. So that allows the lobsters to not be in the water, because we're not boiling the lobsters, right? We're steaming them. So
Yeah.
they're not actually in the water here. So there's a water level, a gap between the perforated pan and the stock pot. And so they're being cooked fully with steam.
Okay, okay. So why would we want to steam instead of boil?
You don't want the water in that shell. Really all we're looking for is the steam heat. We're not looking for the actual boiling of the water. The movement from the water is going to make your lobster meat tough.
Yep.
And so a lot of seafood places will have, and I've talked to some of my students about getting a steamer at some point. They slide in fact there's one sitting right here. They'll slide into a steamer in a perforated pan. My students know this is my smoker. That's why it's colored the way it is. So they're never actually in the water. So you don't boil your lobsters, you steam them.
Great. And so how long are we going to steam these lobsters for?
About 10 minutes.
Okay.
And I think if you ask most chefs, they'd say somewhere between 9 and 11 is what you would care. You don't want to overcook them. The more you cook them, they shrivel, they get tough. seafood is one thing you definitely do not want to overcook. Shellfish in particular.
Yeah. And these are 1 pound to 1 1/4 pound lobsters, so that's why we're doing about a 9 to 10 minute steam. Okay. Our steamed lobsters are cooked. I just threw it into this hotel pan here. Some ice and now some cold water, just to kind of cool them down and stop them from cooking. If you wanted to serve this hot, if it was one of those dishes where the customer was going to be breaking it down themselves, you obviously just serve it hot to them. But we were going to break these down and make like a lobster salad out of this or something. Okay, while our baked lobsters are...
Do it. Yeah, take 2.
Okay.
I'm putting that in there.
Take 2. Okay. While our baked stuffed lobsters are in the oven, we're going to go ahead and break down our steamed lobsters that we've cooled in our ice bath. As you can see, it's quite watery now. But let's just talk about our setup really, really quick before we start breaking these down. Now, Chef, I noticed that you had this set up when we were breaking down the baked lobsters. Why is this cutting board in the pan like this?
It's to keep the juices from, be it the water or the liquids coming out of the lobsters, to not drip down over the side of the table, onto my shoes, onto anything I might be storing underneath on one of the shelves. So it keeps everything kind of contained right in my...
Makes for easy cleanup too.
Sure does. You just pick it up and walk it over to dish.
If you don't have a pan like this at home, if you're doing this at home, just have a bunch of towels ready, because it does get quite messy, especially if your ice bath is kind of like really gone to water now. So it's just good to be kind of like cautious of that. The other thing we have here is a bowl that is in some ice, so that way when we pick the lobster meat, it can go right in here. That way we keep everything at a safe temperature.
So one thing you do want to keep in mind too, when you're picking the lobsters, is oftentimes this will be ready to eat food. So if you're not serving yourself, if this is in a restaurant setting, you want to wear gloves, because it might be going into a lobster roll. It's not going to see heat again. It may be going into a pasta dish where it is, but I would use it, consider it ready to eat food at this point.
Okay, so let's get some gloves on and break these down.
All right. But I'm not ready.
You're ready.
I'm not ready. Oh, pressure. Some people are used to being on TV. Some people aren't. All right. So now I'm going to show you guys how to break down a cooked lobster. Really, there are a couple ways to do it. They're all the right way. Most of you have probably seen the good old cracker, and if you were sitting at a dinner table with someone, you would probably use a cracker and not a wooden skewer perhaps, but they do make the little metal picks.
Yeah.
So these would be the 2 tools you would use. Being soft shell, you don't even really need a tool, and I'm going to show you that now. With a hard shell, yeah, you probably need something to get through the shell. These little spines can be quite hard, especially on a hard shell lobster. So you just kind of want to be careful you're not cutting your hands. See that happen. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove everything from the body. There's really nothing to speak of that's usable in the body as far as meat goes. What we are going to do is save all the shells, as you can see here. Save the first one, because it makes a great lobster stock. You can turn it into a bisque. You can make like a bechamel, or like a velouté, a lobster velouté out of it. So we're not done at this point. These are very useful. You can roast them off, and then I know my students at least have done many stocks, so you would do the same kind of procedure you would with a fish stock. So that goes in here. I'll show you a little trick with the legs here. There's not a whole lot of meat to speak of in these guys, but depending on where you're working and who your chef is, you may be required to remove this. So you can usually just push it out with your fingers sometimes not. So a little trick we have in the business is a rolling pin. You can see that meat.
Yeah, squeeze right out.
Squirts right out. So definitely, depending on who you're working for, you may be required to remove that.
Tedious work, but it got to be
tedious,
done,
but,
right?
Hey, you know, a lot of chefs look at everything as money, and that's really kind of the mindset you need to have if this is going to be your career choice. I am not going to pick them off.
And if you're at a barbecue and you're eating lobster yourself, I just simply just
It's put it in my mouth like a straw.
Right,
and
exactly.
You can pull it right out with
Yep.
your teeth.
Yep.
So we'll do the two claws first. You can see one's big, one's small. One's a pincher, one's a crusher. Every lobster will have two different shaped claws, just like this. Obviously, the bigger one has more meat. This is my favorite part of the lobster. I would take claws and knuckles, these are what we call the knuckles, over the tail all day long. I think it's sweeter. It's more tender than the tail, but historically the tail has been what people like because it is such a big piece of meat. So remove the knuckle meat. So what I'm going to do is take this part of the claw, just kind of pull it off, and there's this big piece of cartilage on both these claws. It's much bigger in this one, that if you're careful, and hopefully I can do it, if you pull kind of slowly, oh, didn't happen. We'll show you on the other one. So again, with soft shell, do you need a tool? Probably not. So that piece of cartilage I mentioned is actually still in here, and you do want to pull that out.
And you can kind of feel it when you kind of squish the claw just a little bit. You can feel that there's something.
Sometimes it will come out with that lower piece of the claw. Sometimes it just won't. And this is going to be one of those ones where
Well, yeah.
it won't.
I think from experience, at least, the hard shells are a little bit easier to get that cartilage out.
But
Then-
you can see why you wouldn't want to eat that.
Right, yeah. But the soft shells, like what we have today, it's easier to kind of like lose that cartilage when you're pulling it out. Oh, that might be happening.
So this one came out.
Yep, beautiful.
So in a perfect world, it would do that every time. And then again, so in a hard shell, if you're working in a restaurant, I think you'll see a lot of cooks and chefs use just the back of a chef's knife to kind of crack into if they don't want to use their hands. But again, with soft shell, it doesn't take much to get through.
It's a beautiful claw.
So there's your claw. So knuckle meat is awesome. Probably my favorite part of the lobster. And I just use my pinky. So I'll break this into 3 parts.
And they're kind of like, the parts are kind of already segmented.
Yep.
Can I see that whole one, Chef?
Mhm.
Yep. So they're kind of already segmented.
So, yep,
it's-
there's a piece here, there's a piece here, and then
It
there's
bends.
a little piece
Yep,
right there.
Yep.
So that first piece popped right out. This piece, I like to just take my pinky and pops right out. So again, there's this little guy.
Now, if you're using this in like a lobster salad, it probably wouldn't matter so much if the pieces were kind of chopped up a little bit. But if you're making something like a lobster risotto, you kind of want those big chunks of lobster. It kind of showcases your skill to be delicate with the product, and also show that there's lobster in the product too.
So this knuckle came out in one piece, but you can see what Chef Parent was talking about, how it's kind of segmented right here. And oftentimes, those will be, I'll break it for instructional purposes, but it'll come out in 2 pieces like that. And this is just such good meat. And now the tail. So I've seen many people do tails many different ways. Some people will just break it right down the middle. I've seen people pop open one side. What I like to do is I'll start at the back and take these fins off. If you just kind of pull backwards, they crack right off. There is meat in there. I don't know if you can see this or not, Chef, but it looks like the meat has stayed attached to the tail in here. Oftentimes
nice.
It'll pop
Yeah.
right out. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But again, according to your chef's rules, you may or may not need to dig into that. So what I find is easy. Well, why crack the tail? I can just take my finger and the whole tail
Push it
comes
through.
right out. You don't have to deal with trying to break the tail for any reason, in my mind, but you know, some people have certain ways of doing it. So here's your tail. There's one more step here. So there's this, I don't know what it's called. Does it have a name?
I would call it track. I mean, it's basically the poop. It's the poop track.
So this thin
So
piece,
they call it like a sandy track that you're trying to get out. Yeah, that is just kind of
that comes off, but if you can see in here, that all needs to come out too.
Yep.
And if you go down to this little corner of the tail, there's a little nerve or membrane in there that also needs to come out. Right in there. But what you can see is all of this.
Yep.
That's not good eating. So what we'll do, oftentimes, is we'll have just a little bit of water.
Yep, help rinse it off.
Rinse it off a little. Yeah, all gone. And we'll keep this too. Is it the best eating part of the lobster? No, but
Chop it up in a
chop it
lobster
up in
salad,
yeah,
yeah.
in a lobster roll or something like that, for sure.
Awesome.